Good morning. It's so good to be with you this morning and to be a part of the Leadership Summit 2023. As you heard Lynn say, my name is Tim WIENS, and this is a real delight and privilege for me to be with you today and to be a part of this conference. I am excited to learn from you, learn with you, and to be a part of everything that is said and done over the course of the next couple of days. Will you stand with me briefly? I'm going to open with a quick word of prayer and ask that God bless our time together, my words. Lord, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. God, as I speak today and as we learn together, as we converse and as we lead our schools, God, may we do so in such a way that our first priority is to bring you glory and honor and praise. We love you, Jesus, in your name. Amen. Amen. Thank you. Well, again, thank you for sharing your time with me, for allowing Katie and me and Elliot, who is back in our room, to be with you, to examine some issues of independent schooling and specifically Christian schooling, both here in Australia and in our home, the United States. As you can tell from my accent, I am not from Australia, but I do believe, based on a lot of the research that I've been doing over the past several months on school trends in the US and in Australia, we have a lot in common. And there are a lot of things that we share together that I believe will help us all grow together. The opportunity to share with you today brings me to ultimately the what, the why, and the how of what we are doing together as Christian schools. And as I begin, I was asked to speak specifically about what's happening, trends that are taking place in United States education. But before I get there, one of the things that I always want to do with our school leaders back in the United States and with those who I work with is bring us back to our foundation. I think that the foundations of what we do are unbelievably important in helping us understand why we do what we do and how we do what we do. So in terms of the foundations, we always start with a little bit of a graph that shows us the steps that we take to getting to our outcomes. And it always, in the Christian school network that I work with, it always starts with our theology. And so foundationally, understanding who we are in Christ and why we exist as Christian schools, that theological foundation is the beginning of what we do. That theological foundation leads us to our philosophy of education. Why do we educate the way that we educate? Who are we educating? And what does that mean? If we're all created in the image of God, what does that mean for the education that we're providing to all students that are within our school? That philosophy then brings us to our pedagogy, that art and that science of teaching, how we lay out what we do in our classrooms, what we're doing with our students and how we're doing it and why we're doing it, which then leads to our outcomes. So it's this theology that leads to our philosophy, that leads to our pedagogy, that ultimately leads to the outcomes that we expect of our students and really of ourselves as well, as faculty members, as teachers, as leaders. And my understanding of you is that you are all leaders of Christian schools here in Australia. And so today we're speaking specifically about this what, the how, or the why, and then the how. And then we're going to get into the trends that we're seeing and hopefully have some conversation together, both amongst us all and at your tables, of what we should be looking for in the future. So we're going to start with the foundation and we're going to end with the future thinking and how we're going to go about thinking about and why we're going to go about thinking about a very uncertain time, a very uncertain future that lies before us. So, how should we go about doing that? One of the things that excuse me, my voice just cracked a little bit there. One of the things that I think that we need to think about, I was reading in a blog, an Australian blog actually, a couple of weeks ago, an author talked about the author of this blog talked about the need from going from literal to risk-based thinking, from literal to risk-based thinking. And I think that in these times, that is really important for us to think about. What does it mean for us to have been a group of people, educators, who really, for centuries, or at least a century, have kind of been stuck in a progression of how education always has been done, to move to a step that takes us to risk-based thinking so that we start to understand and think more thoroughly about what the future might hold, because the future is truly uncertain. So, how should we look at what we do? We've got that firm foundation in place. We've got that philosophy in place. So let's look at the what. We're educators in Christian schools. So in fact, because we're educators in Christian schools, we have to think about the how and the why. And so the what and the why of what we do will impact the how. But I want to say this at the start. The what and the why, in most parts, in most cases, are unchanging. The what and the why are unchanging. It's the how that has changed significantly over the last several decades. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. But we're going to start with the what. The what is Christian school education. That's what we're called to do. We have been called to be Christian school leaders. And so the what of what we are doing is educating students for the glory of God. I'm always taken back to the Westminster Shorter Catechism. What is the chief end of man? Anyone? What is the chief end of man? To glorify God and enjoy Him forever. The chief end of man, humankind, if we want to put it into 21st century terms, the chief end of us is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And our call as Christian school educators is just that. To glorify God and enjoy Him forever, and to train our students to do likewise, to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. One of the things at the school that I have been at for the last 5 years that we always talk about is this idea of excellence. Excellence in everything that we do. And our definition of excellence came from the dean of the conservatory at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois in the United States, Harold Best. And his definition of excellence was being better tomorrow than you are today. Being better tomorrow than we are today. And so if that's the case, if excellence is being better tomorrow than we are today, what does that mean for us as Christian school leaders? What does that mean for our students? And what does that mean for the outcomes of our institutions? School leaders who have been tasked with the responsibility of preparing our students for a rapidly shrinking world with rapidly growing boundaries. Think about that. We live in a rapidly shrinking world, but the boundaries are increasing rapidly. Let me explain what I mean by that. When we think back, I was a history teacher. When you think back to the medieval days, to the Middle Ages, the average middle-aged person, not middle-aged in terms of their lifespan, but in the Middle Ages, in the medieval times, the average person during medieval times knew 50 people in their lifetime. They knew 50 people in their lifetime. They never left their village, and they rarely lived past 50. Their lifespans were short. Life was, well, I'm trying to think what the statement was. It was short, it was brutish, and it was difficult, right? Life was difficult during that time, and people knew 50 people in their lifetimes. Think about how many friends you have on Facebook today. Is Facebook a thing here in Australia? I think about the people that I have on LinkedIn, that I'm connected to on LinkedIn. Several thousand people that I'm connected to on LinkedIn, of which I know almost none of them, right? People connect with each other. But the reality is there are people all over the world that I'm connected to. It took me 20 hours to fly from Atlanta, Georgia, to get to Sydney, Australia. Whereas years ago, it would have taken months to get in a boat and to float here, to sail here. The world has shrunk dramatically. Technology has created a shrinking universe, a shrinking world. And as a result of that, the boundaries that our students face are drastically growing. That's what I mean by that last statement. They have opportunities that we could have never dreamed of back in the days when we were growing up. Our students do. I think about our own son. He is sitting here in Australia. I'm 53 years old, and this is the first time I've ever been in Australia. My son is 13. All right? The world has changed in such a manner for us and for our students that their worlds are shrinking and their boundaries are growing. And so what does that mean for the what of what we do? It doesn't change the what of what we do. That's really the answer. The why of what we do also does not change. Let me go back to this for a second. The what permeates every facet of our organization. Your mission, and this conference is all about mission and momentum. Your mission should permeate every facet of your organization. Does it? Every decision that you make, does it coincide with the mission that you have set for your school and for what you expect of your students? That's why a mission exists. It helps us determine the direction that we're going to go. The what of Christian schooling is to prepare and educate students. I don't know if this is an issue in Australia, but in the United States we talk about this all the time. Christian schools are schools. Our job is to educate our students. We're not the church. There is a difference. The church was created specifically for a reason, and we all should be engaged in the life of our local church. Everyone should be engaged in the life. My theology suggests that everyone that is a believer should be engaged in the life of their local church. But the Christian school is not the church. The Christian school is a Christian school that has a foundational element that Jesus is the foundation of everything that we do, that Christ is brought to bear in everything that we do, but that the role of the church to administer the sacraments, to baptize, to serve communion, to do those things, that is the role of the church. The Christian school, the role of the Christian school's primary role is to educate. And we educate for human flourishing. We educate so that our students are prepared to go into the world, to flourish in the world, to thrive in the world, and to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world. And excellence in education guarantees that that will happen in our Christian schools. If we're truly looking to do what we're called to do, that excellence translates into that human flourishing in the future. And let me tell you, sometimes we feel like a failure when we watch students walk across the stage at graduation and go and live a life that we don't think is necessarily pleasing to the Lord. But ultimately, we're called to educate them, and the work of the Holy Spirit is to bring that out in their life. And we're so happy when they come back to us and they say, thank you for teaching me this, and thank you for preparing me for this. And sometimes they don't, and that's difficult. But the reality is we are a school that is called to educate. And when we do that, the Holy Spirit is given freedom. Not that we have to grant the Holy Spirit freedom, but the Holy Spirit will do His work in the lives of our students. And then back to what I said earlier. We get back to this idea of the Westminster Shorter Catechism. What is the chief end of man? It is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. If our education is doing that, if it's preparing students to glorify God and enjoy Him forever, they're going to be leaders in their fields, whether they're doctors or nurses or teachers or lawyers or wherever God calls them, missionaries on the field, in the church, in the Christian school. If they're garbage men or women, it doesn't matter, because human flourishing isn't about the job that we do, it's about how we glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And that's the role of the Christian school. Whatever we're preparing our students for, it's to prepare them to flourish and to enjoy God and glorify Him. Which brings me to the why. The why of Christian schooling is, again, an unmovable, unchanging role in the work that we do. It never changes. We do the work that we do to impact generations who will do likewise. They will then impact generations and make a difference for the Lord, the God of all creation. We do this because it's meaningful work, right? I hope that you're here, and I hope that you are educators because you enjoy the work that you do. And if you don't, I'm going to suggest to you that you might want to find another role, because we are called, and our theology of work should help us understand that the work that we do is good. The work that we do actually can be fun. Sometimes it's not. In 2020, I'm not sure I found a lot of joy in educating during the pandemic. I'm just being honest. But the reality is the work was good. God called me to that work, and He called you to that work. And it can be fun, and it should be fun. We're called to do all as if unto Christ. Colossians 3:23 calls us to do just that. If we're doing all as if unto Christ, it gets back to that excellence, right? Being better tomorrow than we are today. Christians should be leaders in the marketplace. We should be leaders in the schools that we're in, because we're called to do something for a purpose. Not that is a lifelong purpose, but has eternal purpose. And as a result of that, it's fun. It's inherently fun. Okay? And then back to the why. The real why is preparing our students to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. I'm sorry you're hearing me say that over and over again, but I really believe that that's what it's all about. That's what we're called to. As human beings, we are called to glorify God in everything that we do. All of the work that we do as Christian school educators is an act of worship. What I'm doing right now is an act of worship. I'm worshiping God through the words that I say. Even though I might not necessarily say every word about Jesus, the words that I say and the actions of my life now and throughout today bring glory and honor to the Lord God. Or they don't. My life is a work and a service to my God. Which brings us to the how. My point in all this, and I've said it, is that the what is still the same. The why can never change. However, the how is rapidly changing. The how in the world today is rapidly changing. Lynn mentioned my son Elliot, who's just turned 13 years old. And Elliot, as many 13-year-olds, has a mind of his own. He is all of a 13-year-old boy, and he knows so much more than his mom and I do. He's smarter than we are. We cannot mention that I'm actually saying this, because I spoke about him in chapel one time at school, and that was almost the end of our relationship whatsoever. But you understand what I'm saying about 13-year-old children and their developmental frame as adolescents. Think about when we were children. We were the same in that sense. Our bodies were transitioning, our minds were learning and growing. Things were the same. But think about what life was like when you were 13 years old or when you were 10 years old. And then think about what life is like for a 10-year-old today, or a 13-year-old today, or an 18-year-old today. And the many, many ways that our children's brains are being formed differently than how ours was formed. Now, one of the things that I've seen since I've been here in Australia is that you are a much more outdoor people. You spend much more, at least from what I can see, you're much more active and much more engaged in the world around you than those of us who live in the United States. The United States has become a very sedentary community, very large sedentary community, with growing obesity and growing depression and all sorts of different growing negative things happening in our lives, because not only are we sedentary, but if this was a cell phone, what are we doing? We're on our smartphones. And our children's brains are being formed in different ways as a result of that. Go back to the pandemic of 2020. Our school that I've just resigned from in 2020, 21, 22, 23, we're having to re-educate parents, and we're having to re-educate children in our preschool on play. I'm not joking. We're having to teach our 3- and 4-year-olds how to play. When we put them outside, they go and sit at a table or sit on the ground, not knowing how to actively engage with one another and with nature. And so we're having to hire people to come in and train our children literally what it means to play. And our preschool director at the school that I was at is going across the state of Georgia in the United States, giving conferences on how to retrain or train for the first time your children how to play. Because during the pandemic, what did we do? We locked in and we gave them screens. And their minds were wired, their brains were wired in different ways through screens than they had been at any point in history up until that time. And that continues to be the trend in the United States today. I don't know if that's a trend for you today, but it is a trend in the United States. And it's not just with our younger ones, it's with our older students as well. If you walk into a cafeteria in many schools, into the dining hall of many schools, what you might see are students, instead of engaging one another in talk and conversation, in friendship, they're on their device. Some schools don't allow that. Other schools do. So depending on where you are, you see students engaged with their device as opposed to engaged with one another. And I'm going to suggest to you today, and I'm going to get back to this, but one of the primary responsibilities of education and of educators is to train our children, to train our students in terms of what it means to develop relationships. Education has and should always remain a relational activity and endeavor. God created us to be relational beings. My wife, Katie, and our son, Elliot, and I just last week watched the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks. Have any of you ever seen the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks? Tom Hanks is stranded on this deserted island in the middle of the South Pacific, and he's there, I believe, for 5 years. And he kind of starts to go a little bit crazy, right? But one of the things that washes up on shore is a beach ball. And his hand is bleeding at the time that it does, and he puts his hand on the beach ball, and it makes an imprint that kind of looks like a face. And does anyone know what he names the beach ball? He names it Wilson, because it's a Wilson brand beach ball. And Wilson becomes his friend, and he starts talking to Wilson. He carries on a relationship with Wilson. And when he's trying to escape the island on a raft, Wilson floats away, and he's heartbroken because that was his relationship. He didn't have anybody to talk to. He didn't have anybody to be engaged in life with. And so he created a relationship. And unfortunately, for many of our students, they're doing that on their devices. And they're not real relationships. They're not real friendships, as Facebook might suggest. And so the how of what we're doing is dramatically changing in terms of the minds of our students, but also the technology that's impacting the minds of our students. I want us to think about 4 things, and I'm going to go through this one by one. And I want us to think through how these things are changing so that we might think as educational leaders about what we are doing within our schools so that we might engage our students and our schools in better ways and in continually evolving ways. The first one is understanding the minds of our students. And I've spoken to this one already. Think about how our children's minds are changing in different ways and developing in different ways than our minds did. And there are all sorts of studies coming out about the use of smartphones and tablets and devices and time on devices and all of the different ways in which our students' minds are literally, the synapses are being impacted and the brain functioning is different than it was when we were children. And you can do all sorts of Google searches and whatever you want to do and you can find that research. The Surgeon General of the United States just came out this last year with very strong warnings about giving your children devices before was it 16? I think it's before the age of 16. Because of what it's doing to the minds of our students. And therefore, and we'll talk about this later, the well-being of our students and of our children. So what does that mean for us as educators? What does that mean for us in the schools in which we lead? I'm not suggesting to you that you get rid of technology. I'm not, because we live in the 21st century and technology is integrated into the world in everything that we do. But what I am suggesting to you is that you start to reframe and rethink what technology is, how it's used, and how we go about developing strategies in our schools to understand the minds of our children and to reach them where they are and to take them where we want them to go. A few months ago, I was listening to Christian radio, and this kind of shows the little bit of the dinosaur that I am. Does anyone listen to radio anymore? I was listening to radio. There's a few people that listen to the radio. I was listening to a Christian radio show, and they were talking about how the smartphone has dramatically impacted and changed world missions for the better. Millions and millions of people have heard the gospel or have read the gospel for the first time in their lives as a result of the smartphone. 6.9 billion smartphones are in use today. 6.9 billion smartphones are in use today in the world. Virtually the entire world has access to the gospel of Jesus Christ, or whatever we want them to have access to, as a result of the smartphone. So think about the opportunities and think about the drawbacks. There are significant drawbacks to that, but there are significant opportunities. And so when we start to think, strategically, when we start risk-based thinking, these are some of the things that we need to start thinking about. What does it mean to have these things in place? Communication, that's the second one. The ever-changing communication practices. I think about where our teachers are today in the United States. I can't speak to how it is in Australia, but in the United States, our teachers are starting to spend just as much time communicating with parents as they are communicating with their students. Parents have changed dramatically. And as a result of communication practices and technology, our teachers are having to change with that. And in some ways that's good, but in a lot of ways that's not so good. As we think through, and I'm going to come back to that, some of the changes in the world around us. In the 1980s, the trifecta, this was known as the early computer trinity, was introduced in the early 1980s. Anyone know what these three are? Oh, I guess they're down here. We've got the Commodore, the Apple, and the Tandy. The one in the middle is what I learned how to use a computer on in the early 1980s. The other two, not so much. But I think, for many of us, this was where we started to learn computers. But think of the difference since the 1980s, how quickly and rapidly the world has changed around us because of technology. And again, I'm not trying to say technology is a bad thing. In many ways, technology is a great thing. But in many ways, technology has changed the how of what we do as Christian school educators. We've got these multifunctional devices today that can do just about anything. When we think about when the United States first sent men to the moon, your smartphone could do that better today than the computer systems that we were using in the United States back in the 1960s to send men to the moon. They have so much more power. In our pocket, they have power. But not only do they have technological power, they have social and emotional power as well. The impact of what our students have in their hands is probably more significant than what I have even considered in my lifetime, in just preparing for this talk. I think about the many hours I spend on email and social media and things like that. It's changed the work that I do as a school leader. I can be reached anywhere at any time. And people expect that I'll get back to them 30 seconds after they send me the email, right? That's the expectation today. But it's not reality. And so somehow finding ways to set those boundaries and to think through that is really important. Which brings us to the changing pedagogies. The work that we do, while the what and the why don't change, the pedagogical component of what we do has had to change. We have technology, and I will tell you, my wife will tell you, I am a dinosaur. I can't do anything technologically. Just putting together this PowerPoint presentation was an act of God. And you can tell it's not the most glitzy PowerPoint presentation, but for me, this is really one of the better ones that I've ever put together, I think. The reality, though, is as I have aged, The way in which I taught when I was teaching European and U.S. history back in the United States to lament. Lament is a spiritual practice, and it's good. It's a good thing to do. The Bible calls us to do it. And to be really honest with you, I lament the days. I lament the fact that the future isn't what the past was. I lament some of the things that we have to deal with as school educators today. But we can only lament for so long. So take a second. Okay, and now it's time to move on, right? We've lamented, and we've thought about how great the past was. But the reality is we've been called to the future. We've been called to the present, and we've been called to the future. So then we must plan, we must prepare, and then we must create. Those are the things that we have to do. As school leaders, we saw that 2020 has called us to think differently than we've ever had to think before. Future thinking is different than what it's ever had to have been before. Gerhard Drenth says, the future is fundamentally uncertain. The best leaders are those who accept this and find sensible ways to work with this. Can we do that? Can we accept that the past is the past and the future is really uncertain? We have to. Abraham Lincoln said the most reliable way to predict the future is to create it. Okay, so what does that mean for us? How do we create the future? In some ways we can't. In other ways we can. So think about that. Rafael Ramirez talks about 3 ways to think about the future. The first one is the future coming toward the past. The future is coming at us, whether we like it or not. The future is hurtling toward us, and we have to be prepared. We might never really be prepared, but we have to be prepared. He also suggests that the present is continually going forward with us. We are still bringing who we are, what we believe, how we live, and what the past brought to us with us into the future. And finally, he suggests that things from the past will always come up later. Things from our past will always come up later. And so we shouldn't forget the past. We understand that if we're going to do well in the future, we have to understand the past. But we have to think about those 3 things. But he also suggests that there are 3 types of possible futures. The first one is predictable. There is a predictable future. You know what's going to happen in here. We think we know what's going to happen in here in the next 5 minutes. I'm going to still be talking, and you'll be thinking, when is he going to be done talking? Right? That's predictable. The second one is there is an uncertain and unpredictable future that we can never really fully understand. And then the third one that he would suggest is that there is a feral future. And the feral future, like a feral cat or a feral child, the feral future states that actions lead to something undomesticated, worse than wild. And that's kind of like what we saw in the pandemic, right? Nobody could have expected what we saw. Nobody could have dreamt of the mass casualties, the loss of life, the change in the way in which we live. We couldn't have dreamt that. So what must we do? We must prepare for the future, whether it is certain or not. Which brings us to our coinciding trends. And I saw 8 when I was studying these trends that look very similar from what you do to what we do. And they include uncertain economic realities, mental health and well-being issues, governance and leadership uncertainty, attracting and retaining faculty, domestic shifts, and by the way, you have my slides, so I'm happy for them to be shared with you, social and political issues, cost of living challenges, and technology-related issues. Let's talk about each one quickly. And again, I'm going long, so let's try and go quickly. As I was preparing for this, I went back to the future. Y'all remember the movie Back to the Future? I went back to the future to get a quote, and this is Marty McFly and Doc at the bottom. And as they were dealing with all of these potential future things, Marty says, "Doc, this is heavy." And this stuff is heavy, right? As we think about the future of education in Australia, as we think about the future of education in the United States, it is heavy. We have a lot to think about. We have a lot to pray about. We have a lot to trust God with. But He's also equipped us for this moment. We're Christian leaders equipped by the God of all creation. So we don't have to be afraid. We just have to look to the future and know that God is in control and He's equipped us to deal with it. There are several types of conditions that exist when we start to think about these future trends, or the current trends. And they can be described as tuna conditions: turbulent, uncertain, novel, and ambiguous. And I want you to remember that statement. Turbulent, uncertain, novel, and ambiguous. Because as we think through trends in the future, we need to think about what these four things mean for us and how we plan for them. All right? So this is the part where I'm hoping for a little bit of interaction between you and I. I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these, but I hope that each of you can talk for 1 minute about these two. Uncertain economic realities. In the United States, I can't speak as much to Australia. In the United States, right now, everyone is expecting a fairly significant recession. Maybe not as significant as we were thinking a few months back or 6 months back, but we're all waiting for the recession. What does that mean for our schools, especially in the United States, where we are 100% dependent upon tuition dollars? We don't get government money. What does that mean for us? How about you? Any uncertainties in the economic realm that anyone wants to just throw out there that might impact your school? Are you expecting any sort of a economic downturn in the future? Similar to us, okay? All right. And then changing demographics. This is a big one in the United States. One of the things that's just happened recently is that in the US, because of changing demographics, people are rapidly moving to the southern states of the United States. There are political and economic reasons for this. For the first time in the history of the US, the southern United States had a greater GDP for the past fiscal year than the Northeast, which includes New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, and those major places. So now Atlanta, Birmingham, Miami, places like that have greater GDP than any place else in the United States. Well, I shouldn't say any place else, than the Northeast. So, and that has a lot to do with changing demographics. People are moving to the south. Mental health and well-being issues. What are you seeing in Australia right now in this regard? I've read about some of this, but anyone want to just say something about what you're seeing amongst your students in terms of mental well-being? Well, in the United States, we're seeing a lot in this regard. We are seeing a lot of students who are becoming depressed, who are being diagnosed with emotional well-being issues. And so as a result of that, schools are having to take on a lot more than they used to. We are having to hire more counselors and be engaged in the lives of students in different ways than we had in the past. Governance and leadership uncertainty. I don't know what's happening in Australia, but in the United States, the leadership churn is incredible. Governance issues are impacting the loss of jobs. I just got an email yesterday. I'm a member of the Southern Association of Independent Schools, and the Southern Association of Independent Schools has currently just under 384 schools, I believe. And they are welcoming 50 new heads of school, which I think for you would be principals. 50 new heads of school this year. More than 10%, well over 10% of the schools in SAIS are bringing in new heads. People are leaving the job and going and doing other things. They're retiring. They're going. And governance plays a big role in this, with boards that aren't quite sure what their role is, stepping outside of their lane, things like that. Attracting and retaining high-quality faculty. Are you all seeing this in Australia? This is a huge issue in the United States. Finding teachers just to fill spots that are vacated. A lot of younger teachers are leaving the profession, never to return again. A lot of older teachers are leaving the profession because of retirement, and there's a gap. And schools are really struggling to fill that gap. Social and political issues. Not sure, I tried to do a little bit of research on this morning in Australia. I'm not sure what's happening in the Australian political world, but in the United States, it's really ugly. Uglier than I've ever seen it in my lifetime. I think maybe uglier than we've ever seen it, maybe since the Revolutionary War in the United States. I mean, the divide between the Republicans and the Democrats, two parties that used to be able to work together, now they can't even speak to each other, right? And that's impacting schools. At the school that I just resigned from, we have a population of students whose parents are on both sides of the political fence. And trying to unite them together in one school is really difficult. because they don't want to talk to each other. And if you don't take a side, then you're the bad guy. And so no matter which side or no matter where you are, you're the bad guy as the leader. And that's becoming the rule rather than the exception for all leaders of independent schools in the United States. Political issues are playing a role in what we do, even in Christian schools. And then cost of living challenges. I was watching the news the other morning and saw that if you shop at Kohl's, that's a supermarket, right? If you shop at Kohl's, it will cost you $2,000 more today. This is actually 2 days ago, so 2 days ago, than it would have a year ago at that time for the exact same groceries. $2,000 more. All right? That's a real issue, right? What does that mean for the lives of the families that send their children to our schools and pay tuition? Can they continue to do that? In the United States, this is another huge issue. In the city that we live in Atlanta, Georgia, the cost of living has almost doubled in 5 years since we've moved there. We just sold our house for twice as much as we paid for it and we're moving in 2018. It's a crazy thing. I couldn't live in the neighborhood that I moved into 5 years ago today. That's what our parents are facing when trying to spend $25,000 a year to send their children to our school. That's an issue. And then there are technology-related issues. I don't know where Australian educators are in terms of talking about tech and AI and ChatGPT and all of the things, but I recall about 5 years ago sitting at a conference with Andrew Van Schack, who's a professor at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, with him talking about AI, and he was starting to say some things that the educators were scared about. And he started talking about bots and talking about, what are the holograms called? Avatars. 5 years ago, avatars existed in the lab that they were preparing to be the teachers of future schools. This was 5 years ago. So where are we with the avatar replacing the teacher? Where are we with artificial intelligence replacing the need for us as school leaders? In my opinion, I don't think we have to worry about that. I believe, because of what I said earlier, that education is inherently relational, that we will not only be necessary tomorrow, but we will be more necessary tomorrow. And because of the mental health issues that we are seeing today in the lives of our students, the relationships that our students are lacking tomorrow will be more necessary. Seeing yesterday will be more necessary tomorrow. And so for us, I think we just have to start thinking through, what does it mean to be an educator in these times, to think about future scenarios during these times. The last thing I want you to do, and we're over time, can we take 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes, or should we cut now? Okay, let's take 10 more minutes, and let's do this activity together at our tables. I don't know if you're from the same schools or not, but just you can make up a fake school if you want, or you can use one of your schools. But what might be some of the tuna conditions? I want you to go back to, these trends. All right, choose one of them. At your table, choose one of these trends, okay, that you're going to talk about. Take a minute and look at it. Pick one. Does each table have one? Can I move on? Back to the questions? Not yet? Okay, you're free to talk. Talk to each other. Pick one of these. Okay? All right? Okay. And then I want you to start working through these questions. And we're not going to get through them all today. But it's an activity to start us thinking about how we as school leaders in the 21st century, in 2023, need to be thinking about reframing the way we think about the future of our institutions. Again, we can lament all that we want that our schools aren't the same today as they were in the past, but the reality is, the longer we lament, the less successful our schools are going to be. And so we need to move to future thinking. And that doesn't mean get rid of the liberal arts or get rid of everything that we're doing, but it means to think strategically about what we do and why we do it, the how of what we do. Okay? What might some of these tuna conditions be? What opportunities might arise for our school as a result of the trend? What do we need to explore and learn about this trend? How might we rethink this trend? What is my first perception of its potential impact upon our school? I mean, we could take all day to do this, but the reality is, I just want you to start thinking about one of them. And so take 10 minutes. We'll be done. Let's take until 1:15. It's only 8 minutes. And then we'll wrap up.
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
I'm Sharon.
Nice to meet you, Sharon.
I'm the MC for the day.
Great.
It's great.
Good. I hope there's something in here that people found useful.
Oh, absolutely.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. And where are you?
I'm in Townsville.
Okay.
I am principal of an Indigenous school.
Oh, good. Good for you.
So, but it's amazing that once you talk about a Christian school, you immediately share common ground, don't you?
Absolutely. 100%. Yes.
Oh, no, it's fine. I just said if everyone's back here. Yeah. All right, just after.
Yeah. And we'll do bringing in music as well to give the dance. You know, like we did just we did that last week. The teachers were
Fantastic. Oh, you say
yeah.
All right.
Fantastic.
So what are you enjoying Sunshine Coast so far?
Yeah, we've only been on the Sunshine Coast for 2 days. So we arrived in Sydney and spent a couple of days there. Then we went up to Cairns and went out to the Great Barrier Reef, spent a few days up there, and then we went to the rainforest, spent a few days up there. Now we're here and we'll spend a few days on site here and then go back to Sydney for a few more days.
Oh, great.
So
I'm
it's been
really glad that you got to see the Great Barrier Reef.
Yeah, it was. I mean,
50
it's,
years' time, you never know.
you never know. The world is
'Cause
changing significantly.
We live in Townsville, so we're not too. We often go to take the kids to the one of the islands because you just don't know, do you?
You don't. All right, I gave him 4 more minutes, and then I'll do a little wrap up and give it back to you.
Oh, sorry.
Tell me your name one more time.
Sharon.
Sharon. I will turn it back to you as Sharon. Good. When did you arrive here?
I came for the weekend because it takes a couple of hours to get here.
Yeah. So you've been here for a few days.
Yeah,
and good.
it's
And you're
lovely.
enjoying it.
Yeah.
Good.
It's a nice spot,
Good.
and the weather's been pretty good.
It has until today. It's been wonderful. Yeah. And hopefully it'll clear up a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your son is enjoying it?
He's having a great trip. He is he wants to move here now. So.
And I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about it being outdoors. Like we're particularly on this coast.
Right.
We are much more outdoors.
Yeah, and we have a few places, in Colorado and California, it's a little bit more like that. But not so much anywhere else. So people, especially where we live in the South, because it's so hot and humid, people just shut themselves indoors.
Yeah,
So,
I understand.
yeah. But- all right, we'll give them one more minute.
I'm sorry.
No problem. All right, why don't we wrap it up? We are over time. And originally I thought we would talk about this a little bit, but since we're over time, I appreciate your willingness to talk amongst yourselves and to start to think through these things. But my call to you today is, as Christian leaders, understanding the what and the why aren't changing, but the how is, to be future thinkers, knowing that we're called as Christian educators to train our students to flourish and to enjoy God and glorify Him. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you today. I look forward to meeting many of you and spending time talking to you. I hope this provided you with a few ideas for the future. Have a great day, and God bless.